welcome to this month's user group. We appreciate you making some time to be with us. And today is all about market segmentation, perhaps when one size does not fit all. So we'll be focusing within the Eloqua segmentation area. But first of all, let's get some housekeeping out of the way and we'll go from there. So as you may or may not be aware, we use Zoom to record our sessions, and replays will be available via our website as well. So you can access those from our blog at any time. We certainly encourage and hope that you'll ask some questions throughout the session. So we'd ask you to use the Q&A function within Zoom to do that. And just be aware, of course, that those questions are public. So everybody on the line can see those questions and can in fact upvote those questions if they're, or even answer them. If they feel that they know the answer, that'd be great. So if you do have something private you'd like to ask us without everybody knowing, that's fine. Go ahead and use the Zoom chat function to ask those private questions. Just to introduce ourselves, my name is Derek Bell, Director for Customer Success and Marketing at Marketing Cube, and I've got Matt Hemsley, our Marketing Manager, and also Jason O'Donnell, our local Georgia guy based here in Sydney, on the line with us today. So thanks guys for being here with us. All right, let's jump in and have a look at our agenda, and we'd like to share with you a little bit of attribution to have a look at how people came to register for the webinar today. I've just realized I've missed something, but that's okay. I'll explain it to you in just a moment. So the agenda, one, the power of Eloqua segmentation, or why you don't want to work with lists. So we'll kind of talk about that mentality and what that means and how we can perhaps get more out of our campaigns by thinking further about the power of the segmentation. Which comes first, your audience or the campaign? We'll also look at some tips to help you build better audiences within Eloqua using the segmentation tool. And then also just have a quick look at any recent updates that have occurred. And the last group of Eloqua customers will go live on release 21B this weekend. So, and then we'll have live Q&A at the end. And as you know, we are really comfortable with you asking questions throughout the webinar. So please don't necessarily wait till the end of the webinar to ask your questions. So the attribution side of things. Essentially what we'd like to do here is just open the kimono a little bit and show you how people manage to become registrants for today's webinar. So what you see there are 3 names of emails, and they're in sequence of those that are delivered to people. So this month we did things a little differently. We sent invitations to our Asia Pac audience, and also the same invitation to our North American and European contacts, and we made some assumptions about where you were as to which of the 2 webinars you'd like to attend. We found, so you'll see there right at the beginning with number 1, so 7% of people that while we sent them the Australian registration or defaulted to the Australian webinar time, they actually chose the US to register for. So that's interesting in and of itself. The second one that you'll see there, which is the lion's share of registrants for today's webinar, came through from the first invitation. So we sent out the first invitation, and majority of people that registered for today actually utilized that first invitation. Then the final group, the 27%, is the third email. So the third email goes to people who opened the first invitation but didn't register for the user group. So it's sort of a last chance style communication. Now, the one I realized that I forgot to add in here, which is another slice of, I'd say probably roughly 20%, so we'll obviously adjust those figures, is some LinkedIn registrations as well. So I omitted to include those. But so a mix there, we do some paid advertising within LinkedIn as another way to drive registrations for the webinar. So we just like to share that with you because, you know, all of this stuff is kind of interesting generally for marketers. You can see that getting that data is quite easy. This is essentially extracted from form submission data. So, so there you go. Okay, let's jump into our first area, which is the power of Eloqua segmentation, and this idea or notion of why potentially working with lists is not ideal. And you can see it's a massive crowd of people. So we've got lots of photos of people this month. So I wanted to start with the notion that perhaps moving from this idea of fixed lists to a more segment style approach of things requires a little bit of a paradigm shift. And having used that term many, many times in my career, I'd forgotten who actually authored that statement. It was Thomas Kuhn, and using it in a scientific context. But of course, in the business world, that's where we get most of our expressions and terms from. But in amongst what he said, I think the key point to extract from that is a paradigm shift is a profound change in a fundamental model. And for many years, that's exactly how we've behaved as marketers. It's very list oriented, and depending on platforms we're using, that usually translates to Microsoft Excel, and doing all sorts of strange things with lists backwards and forwards, and blending them with CRM and maybe even purchase lists, etc. There are all sorts of ways as lists come together. But the key thing is that they're pretty static in the way that they work. And we'll expand on that a little bit more and explain why segmentation is a much better approach. So the paradigm shift requires a few things. And in some cases, I think what it does require is this notion of we have to stop. We just have to stop what we're doing, because if we just simply continue to do what we've always done, we'll typically get the results that we've always got. So we need to stop. We need to think about this approach. We need to think about a smarter way of doing things, and then determine our campaign objective. And so sometimes the campaign objective is a little bit lost in amongst the list mentality that we have. So sometimes, it's a worst case scenario. The direction from the business could be, we'll just email everybody in the database. Well, that's probably not a good idea, okay? Because filling people's inboxes with irrelevant communications is never a good idea. And certainly from a selfish motivation as a marketer, what we want is much better open rates, and we want much better click-through rates. And we get that through a far more targeted audience. And so the campaign objective becomes very important to that process. And so you can see there, step 4 I've suggested is that we then start to build the audience. And let's expand on that. So lists versus segments, and really what is the difference? I suppose what I've tried to do here is just sort of outline through my experience of working with customers, and obviously Eloqua customers, as to what the difference could be. So the list mentality tends to be a very static one, and it's unchanging. It's usually based on profile data. It can be from Eloqua, but it can also potentially be from a CRM platform. Maybe it's a student management system. There can be a whole range of different ways. It could be a database of fans. Perhaps you're a football team. There are a whole range of different ways that you will drive the creation of those lists. Humans, by their very nature, are not static. We change, and our preferences change, our likes change, our profiles will change, etc. And so we need to be responsive to that. So it's really hard to try and create a really dynamic campaign that is potentially ongoing and constant if the nature of people getting into that campaign is static and unchanging, or at worst, requires constant manual uploading of data into Eloqua to pretend to be dynamic. So dynamic segments within Eloqua, which is where you have filters, will generally increase the overall campaign performance. And we've got a range of examples we can share from our own marketing campaigns here at Marketing Cube, because obviously, well, not obviously, but we use Eloqua in what we do. But we see the same result from our customers. But I suppose the final point is it's not a binary exercise. We're not suggesting that you stop doing any more Excel updates or uploads of people, because that will always need to be a part of what you do. But you've got some segmentation capability that really help you capitalize on what Oracle or Eloqua calls the digital body language. So by understanding digital body language and using that information in concert with that profile data, that is that static information, largely speaking, then we hopefully can build a much stronger and a much better segment. So I just want to take you quickly to the campaign canvas to show you exactly what I mean when we use these terms sort of static and dynamic. So for those of you that are using the campaign canvas on a regular basis, you'll notice that when you add your segment to the canvas, there are two options. The first one is the static one, which is the default. So this is where you add campaign members once when the campaign is first activated. The second option is to add members regularly until the campaign is deactivated. So the campaign deactivation works in concert with your end date of the campaign. So if your campaign is running for 30 days, then in this example that you can see on the screen, once an hour, Eloqua is going to go back to the segment, automatically refresh that particular segment to see if there are any new people that meet the filter criteria, and then bring them into the campaign. Now, if your segment is simply an Excel upload, there is nothing there. There are no filters. It's just simply a static uploaded list, which means you can select the second option there to add members regularly, but nothing's going to happen because that is a fixed list that you've uploaded to the segment. Now, of course, you could add more people to the segment, and yes, they will eventually flow through, but you would have to do that using Excel. So that's what we're trying to avoid, is we're trying to graduate from that type of process to a more dynamic process. So the other thing to think about is, don't forget your subscribers. Now, this will depend on how, as an organization, you're using the Eloqua email group construct. If your email groups are being used simply from a reporting point of view to separate your different types of campaigns, then that's not really an opportunity for people to subscribe per se. Now, if you're using them in concert with, say, a preference center, then yes, preference center and email, where people can actually express to you exactly what they're interested in and choose to subscribe using the email group construct, then don't forget those subscribers. And so that really brings us to a point of really thinking about templates and making sure we don't miss people because we're using templates. And if we use templates, we typically have a much more robust and a better experience and a more consistent experience for our audiences. Now, if you're actively pushing people to subscribe, then the templates are an absolute key part of that exercise. One thing that we've been thinking about here at Marketing Cube, I literally just started working on a document yesterday, looking at our own preference center and what we're going to do with that, and some changes that we'd like to make to that. And given the last 12 months, webinars have become an insanely popular way of doing things, and I personally feel that that's not going to wane a great deal. People are itching, I think, in some cases, to get back to a face-to-face or in-person environment, but it will be potentially a hybrid scenario where some people may attend face-to-face or the in-person event, while others may potentially want to do something online. We see this with some of our university clients across the region, where last year they madly rushed once they realized that open days on campus were not feasible, or in some cases weren't even permitted. They had to move very quickly to produce online experiences for people. And some of them did tremendously well. They really did quite an amazing job, and they had Eloqua integrated with platforms like Zoom, and On24 was another popular choice. So that was all done and dusted. So in the Southern Hemisphere, that'll happen towards I think it was, what was it, August, September, October period. Those open days took place. And so this year, the discussion has been around a hybrid scenario, because they realized that, certainly from an international cohort point of view, that they needed to appeal to a group that couldn't physically potentially get to campus for whatever reason. And not just international, but even interstate. And so now they're looking at hybrid solutions where, yes, they'll have open days on campus. And of course, they'd love to have prospective students, physically walking around campus and experiencing that whole thing, but also catering, probably for the first time since the pandemic, of a hybrid solution. And I think in the business world, we're having similar discussions. So it's a brave new world out there. So my point there is, for a preference center, instead of simply having people subscribe to our events, I think what we want to do is get to a point where we can actually have people share their preference. Would they prefer to attend a webinar versus potentially in-person events? So we'll see how that unfolds. So by capturing those preferences and working with that sort of information that you can have contained in your preference center, all of that feeds into your ability to segment people better, not just purely based on profile, but also on expressed preferences where they've told you certain things. So just a reminder for those people who have jumped in to join us, we've got the Q&A function available on screen. So we'd certainly encourage you to use the Q&A, or please ask questions throughout the session. We're happy to do that as we move through today's session. If there's something private you want to ask, where not everybody will see the Q&A, then please utilize the chat function. And we have Matt and Jason from Marketing Cube on the line, and they're here to assist and answer some of those questions. So please feel free to do that. All right, so which comes first, the audience or the campaign? So as I was trying to think through the best way to sort of illustrate this, first thing that came to my mind was the old chicken and the egg scenario. And so then when I found this picture, I was like, okay, well, maybe the chickens are the campaigns and the eggs can be the audiences potentially. As for this little chicken down here in the bottom left-hand corner, I really wasn't quite sure because he was both colors. But anyway, so just a bit of useless fun. But which does come first, the audience or the campaign? Look, and I'm not sure it's necessarily a binary exercise. I don't think there's always the right answer. However, there will sometimes be, when you take a moment to look at your own data, you can potentially uncover a campaign by virtue of looking at people's behavior within your own data. And this can come down to an unexpected spike in visits to certain pages within the website. It could be that there's a nurturing campaign that you've got running where there are a couple of topics that seem to spike really, really well. People are engaging with those and they're opening and they're clicking and they're downloading. What is it about those two topics? Do those two topics warrant potentially a new campaign? You only understand that by looking at your campaign performance data. If we're sort of merrily rolling along and sort of not observing and not looking at that reporting, then we potentially are missing some opportunities to develop campaigns. Okay, so what I want to do here was just give you some examples of different types of campaigns. We've selected 3 and sort of give an idea about how that segmentation process might actually go. So newsletters, and we covered this last month, I think it was, or the month before, newsletters are generally more subscription based. Now, for some organizations, that might mean blasting the entire database, which is never a really good idea. If you are going to blast the entire database, then at least look at delivering some dynamic content within those communications to be more relevant to the majority of people sitting within that list or that database that you're blasting. Newsletters, yeah, they're a little bit different. Yeah, they can sometimes just be purely based on Eloqua data, or there may be really no segmentation or very limited segmentation taking place. The next one would be events. So events is a really good example of where we probably do a little bit of both, and it will depend on your organization, whether you're in higher education, whether you're in business, B2B, or how you run your business and how you run your events. These are generally something that a sales type of team would have some very specific requests, and they'll want to probably provide you with a list and say, well, look, I need these 35 people invited to the event. We don't want to have the event without these people. But you miss an opportunity as a marketer if we don't potentially also go into Eloqua and start to have a look at who in the database is engaging with that content that's going to be covered at the event. So if the event covers topic X, let's go to the website and let's use Eloqua to help us understand which of our known audience prospects or customers, depending on your event, have been looking at that information on the website, maybe over the last 30, 60, or 90 days. And maybe you've previously run some campaigns in the last 30, 60, or 90 days that also talk to this particular topic that will be covered at the event. Let's have a look at the people that engage with that content and let's get them into the list so that we can get communications out to them and invite them to this particular event. So that becomes a mixture from a segmentation point of view of both using filters to build out an audience and then adding to that segment a fixed list, usually from the sales team, to invite. The third point we've got there is to also think about lead score. So using your lead score is another way to bring people to the surface that might be relevant to attend that particular event as well. So events can be quite a mixture. Now, thought leadership. So most of you will publish thought leadership of some sort based on the area of your business and what it is that you do. You may do co-branded research with other organizations and present that. So again, what do we do when we have that type of content come through as marketer from the content team? Do we simply throw it out to the entire database? Well, we probably miss an opportunity there a little bit to be a little bit more specific and targeted. So when you look at the type of content and the thought leadership that has been prepared, again, let's go to the website using Eloqua's segmentation filter capability and identify people who have actually already spent some time over the last maybe 30, 60, 90 or further, 6 months maybe, who have looked at that particular content or that topic on the website. And again, let's address them and let's talk to them a little bit differently than just simply, hey, we thought you might like this. It's really interesting. And here's 3 bullet points and knock yourself out, right? Let's talk to them in the context that we know that previously you've expressed a little bit of interest in this, and therefore we think this would be more valuable to you. And you can only have those conversations with people via email when you do some segmentation and you're actually able to observe their behavior. Once you've observed the behavior, that gives you the ability to have a much richer conversation with people. Now, there will be other people, of course, who you purely based on their profile will believe that they're the right candidate for that content, but that's fine. Have a slightly different conversation with them. When it comes to thought leadership, again, you may tie it into your preference center. There may be those who have expressly requested information from you and are really keen to get your thought leadership and want to hear about what you have to say about your certain products or services that you provide within the marketplace. So don't forget those people as well. And thought leadership is a great one to think about as well from a social point of view. So whether it's LinkedIn or Facebook or other social platforms, you may use those as well to drive people to access your thought leadership. And in reality, depending on your event, social channels may be another way to drive those people in as well. Any questions on any of those points? Let's rocket ahead. Okay, so have you ever tried this? And this was the point I referenced there just a few moments ago, is jumping in and actually having a look at what your own data tells you. Now, if you've been around long enough, I don't know if I've been quite around long enough, but I've certainly been around long enough to remember lots of conversations about big data. That term seems to have diminished and gone away. We then had data lakes and there was all these aquatic themes that seemed to come along with data for some reason. And then today, where am I up to? I'm not even sure. What are we up to today? I can't sort of keep up. I have to check my McKinsey subscription to make sure I've got the laser lingo. But your own data buried within Eloqua is a treasure trove of information. But it's only treasure if you look at it and take some time to understand it. You can do some of that through Insight. Insight can certainly give you some information about that. I find the best experience comes though if you actually spend time within the segment applying filters and adjusting those filters and looking at the size of your audience as you make those changes. I'll show you what I mean by that here in just a minute, but don't write off your own data as a treasure trove, a gold mine of information and potential campaigns with very specific audiences that you can uncover. So I try to think about the thought leadership context in a little bit of a graphical sense. So if we have a landing page of some site with a form, that landing page will talk to obviously a range of things. But when people submit that form, we then will typically send them an email, and we might call that an autoresponder, a confirmation email, whatever. That email is typically sent by the form to the recipient saying, hey, thanks for accessing the content. Click here to download the PDF or whatever it might be, or watch the video, etc. There's always generally a confirmation page in there as well. So that's something else to consider because that's another opportunity to share more information with people. But my point is when people go to that process of accessing some thought leadership and filling in a form and giving you information freely, is it game over at that point? Do we just stop? So I would suggest to you that maybe that's a little bit of a green light to say, well, let's keep going. Let's continue that conversation with the person while they're engaged. So is it appropriate to maybe drop them into a nurturing campaign? Now, there could be a range of different things that you could do, but it will largely depend maybe on the profile information that you've managed to capture. If you have these sort of always on thought leadership campaigns sitting in isolation, there's an opportunity to do a little bit more with them. So what we do at Marketing Cube is we have a range of these types of sites where usually coming from our website, we'll talk about thought leadership, they'll leave our website, go to an Eloqua landing page, fill in some relevant information to access it, and then they receive this email that you can see on the screen. And then following that, we will usually, based on different criteria, we'll drop them into a nurturing campaign. So all of those become routings or directions for people to then fall into our nurturing campaign. Now, you could, of course, base the direction you send them on the questions that you ask. So if you ask some questions at a very rudimentary level, maybe we ask geographical questions, where in the world are you type scenario, and that may determine where you route them. If you ask questions around industry, then maybe industry is something that you use to route people in slightly different directions. If you think about university, the life cycle of the prospective student, for example, are they a returning student? Have they studied previously? Are they looking to do a PhD? Or what is it they're kind of doing? Because the more profile information you can capture will probably determine then where you send them following that particular experience. Remember, one size does not fit all. So this is the one I talked to a little bit a moment ago about looking at spikes in engagement. So as many of you will know, I can see Danny's on the line and Jordan as well. So I think you guys have been with us for a little while, and you probably would have gone through the onboarding campaign. So once you subscribe to the Eloqua user group, we walk you through, it's about 6 or 7 emails, I think, delivered over about a 6-month period. And what we see there, I literally just the other week was looking at this in a bit more detail, and there's a piece of content in there that talks about event registration. And it's a fairly generous PDF that's about 10 pages long that goes through in quite a bit of detail to look at how you can get set up your first event and have a success in doing that, right? So we see that particular piece of content is by and far the most popular piece of content within that area. So that feeds us to do lots of other things. And so covering off event registration from an Eloqua point of view is something we cover in the user group probably 2 or 3 times a year, because we can see it's obviously a topic that people are interested in. But we know that inherently, I think, over the years, but the behavior that we see in those campaigns absolutely reinforces that point. So take time to look at those nurturing campaigns and figure out what it is that's actually working and working really well. All right, so let's move on. What I wanted to do here now is actually, we'll spend a little bit of time in Eloqua, but I wanted to show you some screenshots first, and then we'll dive in and have a look at some of the recent updates as well. So I thought about, okay, what are the key tips that I could give you that will emphasize how you can get the best experience from Eloqua segmentation? And honest to goodness, this is kind of where I ended up. Although, what's the easiest way to create some emphasis on this particular point? And this is the best way that I could figure it. So templates are critical, especially if you have a situation like many of our customers do. Some are not as complex in their data models as others, and some are very complex in relation to their data models. And yet we arrive at a scenario like this sometimes in their Eloqua platform, and it's like, ouch, how on earth are they doing this based on their data model without any templates? So I would suggest to you that when you access the template area of Eloqua, it should look something more like this. It doesn't have to be exactly like this, but it should look more like this. So, Marketing Cube in the scheme of things is a small organization compared to large universities or multinational corporates, of which we spend a lot of time with. But I cannot imagine going about our processes and our campaigns without having templates in place to speed things up. It enhances the consistency. It ensures, and what I find often with templates is the templates help you ensure that exclusions are always part of your segment. It's very often the case that we can rush in and build in a segment, but fail to exclude some important people that should be excluded from campaigns on an ongoing basis. So unless we're using templates, people will mess up. And of course, there's the old adage of simply save as. Go to last month's exercise and save as. And I shared a nightmare story with our Australian and Asia Pac clients on Tuesday, where we had a client several years ago where an individual had been told that that segment is the one that you want to use. That individual misunderstood the context of that segment to that particular audience, and so she got the segment, didn't even do a save as, just grabbed that segment and dropped it onto the campaign. The problem was the content that was being emailed out was more of a business partner style communication. So it contained leaderboards with partners across the region with revenue numbers, targets, goals. incentives, sell this much and we'll give you this. And, we're going to Hawaii next year. So make sure you meet your targets, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that communication went to thousands of end consumer customers. And all I can tell you is it was a monumental disaster. Eloqua did absolutely nothing wrong. Eloqua did exactly as you would expect it to do. The segment was dropped in, the email was sent, and everything functioned beautifully. But the CIO, the global CIO of that particular client, was on the phone to the CIO of Oracle as they were madly trying to work out how to extract information and emails from data centers around the world as to where these emails were going. So all I can say to you, it was an absolute nightmare. Now, that whole scenario could have been avoided completely with a much smarter use of templates, which, funnily enough, followed at that particular client. They started to use templates a little bit more robustly after that particular experience, and also having a process of checking something before it goes live. So handing it off to a colleague to review and double check. So segments, dramatic example I give you, but just to help make that point. So one of the things that we do, and this is something typically when we get access to a brand new instance for a client, one of the first things I'll do is build out for them what I call a base segment, kind of like base camp at a mountain, right? So base segment. And really what this does, it's more about remembering the exclusions than it is anything else. So if we jump in and have a closer look, this is what it looks like. So now this will be unique for everybody, and it is, I find, unique for everybody as we move through our different clients. So you'll be familiar with the plus icon there at the top of the screen, and you've got those sort of 5 options to add your filter criteria, individual contacts, uploading, which I'm sure you're familiar with, using shared filters and shared lists as a part of that exercise. But notice as you get on the left-hand side, these are the things that if I didn't have in my template, I would have to do manually every single time. And also, if I'm doing save as, if there are changes made to the template, but I'm still saving as from a segment that's maybe 12 months old or 2 years old, then my save as is not including the changes that have been built into the template. So again, the save as option is a little perilous in the way that that works. So as you look down that left-hand side, I'm sure that's resonating with you a little bit, right? So inactive, maybe contacts from the CRM, we certainly want to exclude those. Unsubscribes, whether the global or email group level unsubscribes, we exclude them. Hard bounces, let's exclude those. In our world, we exclude some account types. So we have contacts of type customer, prospect, business partner, supplier, agency, what else do we have? Competitors, etc. So there are some that we want to exclude by default, generally speaking. We also do a lot of joint marketing with Oracle. And so we have contacts sitting in our system that are technically owned by Oracle, but are opted into Marketing Cube communications. And so we typically will exclude those people, because if we do a campaign to them, it will be in a co-branded scenario. Those have been marked as spam, so that's more about the lead status coming in from the CRM. And that last one, individuals who join the user group but don't use a professional workplace email domain. So if they use a Gmail or Hotmail or something like that, then obviously they're welcome to join us for the first one, but they won't receive future invitations from us. That's just a business decision we've chosen to make. So all of those exclusions, and that's kind of our default. That's where life begins at Marketing Cube for a segment. If we scroll down the page in the segment window, we arrive at these options at the bottom. And the one on the left with the little double chevron arrows is helpful, because it helps you divide and split up and interrogate the different filters in more clear ways. So let's have a look. So the ones that I want to focus on here in this example are the merge, intersect, and trim scenarios. People sometimes get a bit stumped by this one, they're not quite sure. And the word intersect only appears in one place in the Eloqua Help Center. So if you go to the Eloqua Help Center and type in the word intersect, you'll find exactly what's sitting on your screen right now. And I generally find because I don't use this function often, but when I do, it's incredibly helpful. I find generally I go off to the help center, search for it, get the definitions that you can see on the screen right now, and just read through them again. But essentially, there's some key points there. The merge concept, which makes sense. It says, this is useful for eliminating repeats or crossover between multiple filters and lists. So if you're trying to get that number down to get a better idea, then it really helps. So any duplicates are removed from the final list. So the way it works is you click on one of your filters, hold down the shift key on your keyboard, click on the other filter, and then you can do a right click, or you can access the menu as you see on the screen right here, and you would then select merge. So right now you can see merge is grayed out, but I'll show you, we'll jump into Eloqua here in a second. I'll show you how that works. Intersect. So Intersect combines all of the contacts from the selected filters and lists and only keeps the common contacts. So again, if you're trying, you've got two lists, one is 45,306 and the other is 2,304. What you're trying to identify is the unique people that intersect in both of those. Well, Intersect will help you do that. And then Trim combines all of the contacts from the selected filters and lists and only keeps the contacts unique to one of the selected filter or list. So we'll have a look at that as well, so you can see that in a bit more detail. So the right clicking, I just wanted to be sure that you were clear on some of these options that were available to you within segments. So as you click on any of those different filters within the segmentation area, if you right click, you've got a number of options. First one is settings. So settings is kind of cool, especially if you're collaborating, because you can add a few notes in there. Okay, just a little bit of detail that might be helpful for a colleague who is also helping you build out a particular segment. The second one is to exclude, and this is probably the most common, is the excluding and including of different filters within the segment. Then view contacts. So while you are probably familiar with the view contacts up in the top right hand corner of the screen, that will show you in this example, the 769 people. If you wanted to view the contacts in any one of those individual filters, then again, you can right click on that and choose view contacts. You've also got the share construct, which will create a shared filter for you of that information that is in the filter itself. So if you put together a reasonably complex list of filters within that scenario, and you feel like that could be useful elsewhere, maybe on the campaign canvas or in other segments later down the track, you can create a shared filter of just that particular filter within the segment. So that can be helpful to recycle things a little bit. Then of course, remove is remove. So just kind of deleting it out of there. But flatten, I wanted to explain flatten because this one stumps people sometimes. So the easiest way to think about it is when you upload an Excel list of people to Eloqua, that's referred to as a list sitting within the segment. And so that list is static in nature. We talked about this a little bit earlier. What flatten will do is, because when we look at this at the moment with all of these filters, they're dynamic. And so every time I hit refresh, chances are those numbers will change because the database is constantly moving and growing over time. What flatten will do is it'll take everybody within that individual filter and turn them into a list. So if there are 485 people in that particular filter, if I flatten it, it then becomes a fixed static list of that number of people. So again, that sometimes can be helpful. You see the example here where you're wanting to target a very specific group of people, but you want to do it at a moment in time, and you don't want to add more people to it nor take people away, for example. And so flattening that list will be helpful to enable you to do that. Any questions on those points? Okay, so Field of Dreams. If you're a kid of the 80s, I think so, 80s or 90s, you'll certainly remember this legendary film, If You Build It, They Will Come. Now, if you're a real fan of the movie, you'll know that's not exactly what he said. He said, if you build it, he will come. It was a very specific baseball player that he wanted to come along. And so we know the story. He had to tear down portions of his cornfield, being mocked, of course, by his farmers throughout the community, and built this gorgeous baseball diamond, which you can see on the screen right here. And of course, he did build it. And not only he, but many people came. And so he was having great baseball matches at night time in his cornfield, much to the thrill of neighbors, I suppose. So my point there is that if we build it, they will come. And if we build smart segments, that will make a difference to the way that we do things within the platform. So let's jump in and just have a quick look. And please feel free to ask questions as we have a look here. So what I wanted to do, I thought it'd be easiest to focus on our Marketing Cube team. Let me just zoom in there a little bit so you can see that a little bit easier. So let's first of all have a look at that merging and intersecting and how we do that. For example, in this list here, I've got everybody who works in Marketing Cube and who's opened some emails or submitted a form. And then in this second filter, that one's around looking at a custom object. So I can access the area here. I can remove that particular one if I wanted to. So that goes, and then I can hit save. And hitting save is always, I find if ever you change a filter, you always want to hit save in between each of those two experiences, because it will help you understand exactly how this particular piece of information or the number changes. The other thing is that you can make some notes here as well. I find if they're just all saying filter, 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 it can get a little bit confusing as to in relation to what you're looking at. So you can put some information in there to make that a bit easier. If I wanted to potentially have a look at those people who have hard bounced and have perhaps unsubscribed, let's have a look. There we go. So using the shift key on my keyboard, you can see I've now highlighted both of those. Then we can have a look at the bottom and you can see I've got these options here to merge, intersect, or trim. So let's look at intersect and see if there's anybody that sits between both of those. So I'll click on intersect. Sure, Jordan, I'll explain that for you in just 1 second. Okay, so completed intersection with a new contact list created, done. Okay, so here Eloqua's gone ahead and created. Now in this particular example, there is no overlap, there is no intersecting. There are no individuals that fall within both of those areas. So you can see the look and feel, it's a list essentially, but nobody meets that criteria, so that's fine, I can remove that. But that's essentially the process. So Jordan has just asked, can you explain the spam filter more? So you're referring, just so I'm clear, you're referring to this particular function here, Jordan, I think, aren't you? So this is actually information that comes through from our CRM. So what happens is it's actually a lead status that we've assigned, so that the sales team, we obviously try to prevent dodgy or bad leads going into the CRM. But if the sales team get there and they open it and if they can clearly see that the detail provided is not of any quality or is in fact potentially spam, well, they can flag it as spam. So there's no technology behind that necessarily. That's a human, a CRM user typically, identifying it and flagging it as such. That's all that is. Okay, cool, no problems. Filters is another really clever part within the platform, and you can use filters either here, shared filters here in the segment, but also on the campaign canvas as well. And so, for instance, this is where we look at the different email domains. So you can see we've got quite a few covered there. So that's using a quick list construct where you just do a comma and put in the next information as you go through, instead of having to have multiple filters down the screen. Playing around with these, you've got I'm just going to undo this here for a minute and show you what I mean by looking at saving as you go. So that's 27 or 29. And okay, so now it jumps up to 9. Now the reason it does that is because our wonderful support team, who I love dearly, are constantly putting in different email addresses, but all using Marketing Cube, and I'm actually guilty myself. I do the same thing. So there are lots of us in there, and if you view those contacts, you can see them all here. So you can see these are all actually my name's appearing there the most at the moment, isn't it? Ouch. But yeah, so it's a big list with all sorts of different email addresses, but all at the same domain. So remember, you can click here and do a right click and say view contacts. So that's giving me a view of the 215 people that make up that particular filter versus looking at the 77 contacts, which I can do at the top here. And so I see that. And if you scroll down, you'll see everything there. Okay. Now, so let's come back here and look at how we can access some digital body language. So everything's very profile oriented at the moment, but let's see if we add some digital body language and we can adjust these different filters. The default is always exactly, but I find exactly is probably a little bit dangerous. You generally want to work with at least, because if somebody's opened it 5 times and you've said exactly once, then they're not going to be included in your segment because they've not done it exactly once, they've done it 5 times. So at least is generally the best operator I find to play with. With the dates, you can manipulate those and play around. So often I'm playing with sort of within the last, let's say 90 days, 3 months, you can adjust that as needed. And when you do that, you can then hit save. And we'll start to see which of those members of the team are engaging with some of our content. Okay, so now I'm down to 39. Now, there are other ways I can start to filter this information and provide different scenarios in that filter build process. So let's have a look at maybe form submissions. What I want to do here is show you how things can change based on the structure of your filter and the way you're asking questions. So I'm going to say at least once, and let's, for consistency, we'll say also 90 days. I'm going to hit save. So what you'll see is that, okay, so we're down to 15 or 14 contacts. Now, notice the construct here. So we're asking people who have a domain, a specific domain of Marketing Cube and have opened at least 1 email within the last 90 days and have submitted any form at least 1 time in the last 90 days. Now, this will change considerably if we alter the logic there. So you'll probably be aware that if you click on the words and or, for instance, that they will change. So now I'm going to say, yep, Marketing Cube, opened any email or a form. Okay, great, let's have a look. So we hit save and see what happens. Okay, we don't have 244 employees at Marketing Cube. So what is it that I've actually done there? Okay, so what I've actually done is I've asked Eloqua to first of all find anybody who has an email domain of Marketing Cube and has opened any email at least 1 time in the last 90 days, and the or is completely separate to the Marketing Cube domain. So what I'm looking at there is a group of people who are not Marketing Cube people at a domain and have submitted that form. So what I need to do is adjust the logic. And again, the way we do that is we start to do a little bit of clicking and using our shift key on our keyboard. So opened any email, hold down the shift key, click on submitted any form. And when you do that, if you have a look at the bottom of the screen, you'll notice the word group has appeared. So now we get these parameters or chevrons or brackets putting around those. Now let's hit save and see what happens. This should now focus purely, there we go, on Marketing Cube people. So again, if I click on view contacts, I can validate that by seeing that, yes, absolutely, it's just Marketing Cube people in that call. So that's because we've added we've grouped the 2 filters within it. So now it's purely Marketing Cube and they have either opened any email or they have submitted any form. So you can see that slight adjusting. That's why it's really important, I would suggest to you, hit save every time you add a filter within this area of Eloqua right here. Every time you add a filter, hit save. Because the problem is if you add 5 or 6 or different filters, which is not unusual, that can be a reasonable thing to do, you add them and then you hit save and you get a number, you've actually got very limited understanding of how you got to that number, versus by adding a filter at a time and hitting save and watching that number being this number right here at the top of the screen on the left-hand side, then you've got a much better idea as to how you got to that number and what the impact of those various filters are having on what it is that you're doing. Okay. All right, we're just about finished here. So I just wanted to give you a quick wrap up. We didn't get a chance to get into any detail last month on some of these points. So I just wanted to quickly run through them here today for you. As I said, most of you will probably already be live on release 21B. There are just a few clients around the world who will go to 21B this weekend. The reason we wanted to raise this one, there are some changes that relate to the DataFox Oracle integration coming with 21B, which is great, but also just wanted to emphasize the benefit of these types of applications to help enrich your data quality. Essentially, that's really what it's about. And also helping you uncover information and potentially get information back to the sales team or whoever's responsible to talk to customers to help them understand more about individuals and specifically around accounts. So it's very much probably more of a B2B type of value proposition than potentially, say, for student management and those sorts of things. Now, one of the big things that is going to be really helpful, and this is really helpful largely for anybody outside of the US East Coast time zone, and that includes obviously Canada and South America as well. The changes being made essentially will improve the user experience for me, certainly here in Australia, makes it a lot easier in relation to filters and what I'm doing and what I have to ask and the way I use the platform. For those on the East Coast, it will mean nothing because you've just kind of always had this function for you anyway. But for those outside of that US East Coast time zones, that includes Central and Mountain and West Coast, it'll be a little bit slightly different. So it's a very cool addition. Analytics and dashboards, mostly around cosmetics being updated to the Redwood theming. So we've had a chance to have a look at some of these already. They're looking really, really nice. I think there's still a few CX things they could look at improving. I need to be able to, sometimes the names of things are a little bit too long and you've got to hover over them to see them. And I don't know, I figure I'm on a 27-inch screen, so I feel like I should be able to see a lot more information. But all in all, I'm loving the new Redwood theming. I think it's much nicer and softer on the eye. Don't have silly little cartoons running around the screen everywhere. So yeah, so it's really nice. And so they're kind of working their way through with that. The multi-image and application branded domains. Now, this is probably more so if you're an administrator of Eloqua that this will kind of resonate, but or if you're in a scenario where you're managing multiple brands. So just trying to think of an organization off the top of my head. So let's say you're a Procter and Gamble, and you have many brands that you're focusing on. There's probably a bit of a radical example, but anyway, you get the point. So one organization using Eloqua to market to multiple brands, then there are some things coming and things that are available that will help you with this process. And it is part of the premium branding and configuration package, which is a paid for extra. I think if you're an enterprise customer, it's not. Maybe I think it's included. I'm not sure. I have to double check that one. But essentially what this means is just more control on the branding, which will impact things like deliverability and the way when people click on an image, if they see a URL, for instance, that all of that stuff can tie into a single brand. So if that's of interest to you, you should have a chat to either Marketing Cube or to your Eloqua Oracle representative, and they can assist you with that one. Probably one of the most exciting features with 21B is the controlled availability. Now, all that means is that you need to jump in and log a service request with Oracle to have them activate this particular feature on your instance. So it's simply called form spam protection, and you will find information in the Help Center already about this. But this is essentially what it looks like. So within the settings area of your form, you'll have probably visited this page a million times. You've got the HTML name, etc. Allow form submissions, but then spam protection, which you would then have to turn on. Now, it needs to be turned on form by form, because it can't just be turned on carte blanche, because that won't work in relation to some of your externally hosted forms. Most of you will probably have an Eloqua form that is also reposting from your website. So maybe it's a contact us form on the website and you've integrated that one with Eloqua. So we can certainly do the spam protection, that's fine, but there's a little bit of JavaScript, or I think it's a little bit of JavaScript magic that needs to be added, or a little bit of HTML that needs to be added to that experience in order for that to work. So, so please just be aware of that. Have a chat to your Eloqua administrator. You will find, again, information contained in the help center on that. Or of course, you can reach out to Marketing Cube. We'd love to help you with that as well. Eloqua Engage, if you do have a sales team using the Engage product, there was a little bit of a glitch whereby if you were archiving email assets, the sales team was still able to access those through Engage. So that little loophole has been closed off and is no longer the case. So once you as a marketing team archive an email within Eloqua, it's no longer visible within the Engage platform. Improved user management. So this one's, again, more so for the administrators, but just makes life a little bit easier for everybody. Previously, when you came in to look at your license usage overview, all you would see is the user count and security groups, and that was it. So now what they've done is you've got user count, and they've divided that between enabled users and disabled users. And those numbers, the 22, 20, 0, 21, etc., are hyperlinked as well. So you can click on the 22, you will then see who those 22 enabled marketing platform users are. Again, for the administrator, just a little bit easier versus having to, previously you had to export it. It was all there, the information was there, you just had to export it to get it out, look at it, and use some Excel filters. So it, yeah, just made that experience a little bit nicer, which is good. Then just the final update for browser experiences. Firefox is always where you'll have your Nirvana Eloqua experience. Next to that, Chrome is also delivering the best experiences. And so these are the two release numbers of those browsers where Oracle have done testing and confirmed that they are in fact the best choice or rated A in their language. Hopefully you're experiencing Eloqua in one of those two browsers. And that brings us to the end of today's session. So happy to hang around. If you do have any other questions, would love to walk through those with you. If not, please have a wonderful afternoon, evening. Thanks very much, everybody.